Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host, along with my sidekick Beatrice. So right now, I just finished up getting a shower here at the Loves in Hubbard, Ohio. We're headed east, but my delivery appointment's not till 1800, so I tried to plan my clock out to kind of make sure I would have all the 14-hour clock I needed to get that done. So this morning I had a pickup in Streetsboro, Ohio, and Streetsboro is like right next to Kent, Ohio, and I often think about Kent State University when I'm in this area for a couple of reasons. One is there was that girl that kept getting her picture taken carrying a gun around campus, and I can't remember her name, but I think she's actually more famous for the fact that she pissed herself while she was drunk, and that's the thing that'll follow you your whole life. It's not carrying a gun on campus. It's pissing yourself while you're drunk, not being able to hold your booze. And then I also have a friend who went to Kent State, so he still has an Ohio area code if he calls on his mobile phone, the 330 area code. But I was also thinking today about something that happened in May 4th to be exact, 1970. And if you don't know what I'm referring, it's commonly known as the May 4th or Kent State Massacre. And what happened on that day was that so if you recall, in 1970 we were in the throes of the Vietnam War. Richard Nixon was president, and Nixon had announced, and keep in mind there had been anti-war protests all over the country in different venues. A lot were on college campuses, but Nixon had just announced that the United States was going to expand the war in Vietnam, and we were going to start forays into Cambodia. Now, it's probably true that we were already doing that and just lying about it or not telling the public or whatever, and that often happens in war. But the announcement that we were going to start that sparked a new round of protests. And so, there's a lot of background to this, but basically the governor of Ohio sent the National Guard to the Kent State campus, and there was a peace protest. And when I say peace, I don't necessarily mean peaceful, although I don't think the students were, tearing anything up per se. They were just marching around campus. And there were about 300 students protesting, 300 Kent State students and other people. And I've seen some documentaries on the subject that there may have been some kind of agent provocateur amongst the students who was at least maybe not in the National Guard, but somehow affiliated with the National Guard. But in any event, and may have discharged a firearm. But in any event, there's the protest. Several National Guardsmen fire into, I think the amount is about 67 rounds. They fire into the crowd from a little bit of a distance. It was not a super close encounter. It wasn't like, mano on mano type of thing. It was like across a little bit of a distance. And they fire into the crowd, and it ends up that 4 people are killed, although 2 of the students that were killed weren't even involved in it. They were just happened to be in the area and were struck by errant gunfire. And then 9 or 10 other people were wounded, some of whom had lifelong paralysis and stuff. But there are a couple of things that always jump out to me about that day. There's a famous photo that's here. And in that photo is, the very distraught Mary Jo Vecchio. But Mary Jo Vecchio was just at Kent State's campus and was kind of hanging out with the protesters. But she was only 14 years old when this photo was taken. And the photo won a Pulitzer Prize, and it's probably one of the most iconic images from the Vietnam War era taken, stateside. But the guy that she's wailing over wasn't really involved in the protest. He was just like walking by and caught around and died at the scene. But the other thing that I always think about when I think about this Kent State massacre is what happened 11 days later at Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi. Now, Jackson State, and by the way, so to set the scene, immediately after this, a couple of things happened. Colleges all over the country just kind of erupt in protest. And there's basically a student walkout, an enormous student walkout. Hundreds of thousands of students just walk out of classes, and they just shut things down. And the other thing that happened that was kind of cultural, musical, was Neil Young wrote the song Ohio. And Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young recorded it like right away and got it out to radio stations right away, and it was a huge hit, and it was this like this cultural musical iconography almost, and that's the song solely about this and about our involvement in Vietnam. But getting back to Jackson State, so Jackson State is a historically black college or university, an HBCU. On the 15th of May 1970, Jackson State students were protesting, and local police officers fired into a crowd. It was at night, but they fired into a crowd and killed 2 people. Those killings were overshadowed by the Kent State killings. And I think for a number of reasons. One is it wasn't as widely covered by the news media. 2 is that the victims in that particular incident at Jackson State were African American. And I think that it just kind of got lost in everything that was going on. But Kent State wasn't the only protest where students were shot at, unarmed students were shot at. And it was a these were both huge events, and they really impacted public opinion. Basically, any support that the U.S. government had for continuing the war in Vietnam was pretty much done for. By 1973, we had signed the Paris Peace Accords, and then, of course, our retreat from Vietnam is kind of memorialized by the photos of the U.S. helicopters picking up people off the roof of the U.S. Embassy in 1975. So anyway, that's a little recent history, but stuff that happened right up the road. And by the way, if you go to the Kent State campus, there is a National Historic Landmark there. That's how big of an event this was. I mean, it's easy to forget when you hear about 5 people killed in a shooting, or 6 people, or like the Vegas shooting, 50-some people, right? But these 4 deaths and the photographs and the videotape it had an enormous impact on public opinion in this country, and an enormous impact on how the war would be conducted going forward. So let's go on and talk about what I want to talk about trailer doors and door latches. So let's go in the back and look at this. Okay, so here's the back of my trailer, but I'm going to show you a picture of what this main latch looked like when I actually originally did my walk around of the trailer and checked the seal. So as you can see, this piece on the right-hand door was basically up against the piece on the left-hand door. And what was happening though is that the seal was separated. You see how the seal's nice and tight against the door here, okay, all the way up. Well, because this was pulled back probably at least an inch, right? This seal was not seated, excuse me, this seal, which is on the right door, was not seated against this like strike plate here on the left-hand door. And so the whole back of the trailer was like perspiring. And so what I did with a wrench and a hammer is basically move some stuff around and got this to close tightly without breaking the seal, because the seal was already on there. Now, I have some of these round, like high security locks. I have a bigger one that can go on here, except you'll notice that this isn't aligned. And I tried to hammer it in a little bit, but still couldn't get it aligned to get my bigger lock on there. But these locks are really hard to cut. You'd have a tough time cutting that lock. I know there's been some recent stuff where they said the acid alloys are like can never be cut. I think that's not true, but anyway. But here's why this seal is important. If this seal isn't seated properly, this trailer, and this load happens to be set to -1, cold air leaks out, right? Because the air comes across the top of the trailer to the back, down, and then it's supposed to go underneath your cargo, and then it's basically recirced, right? It's recirculated. But with this seal not being the way it's supposed to, you get leakage of hot air coming in, but you also get cold air leaking out. And while I don't think at -1, it's going to defrost anything that's supposed to be frozen, I do think that when you don't have that seal in the right, seated correctly, the reefer itself has to work extra hard. So you're basically wearing out the machine sooner than it would have to. It's just like leaving the door open at your house and leaving your AC on full blast, right? So the other thing you're using at your house would be electricity, but here, more diesel fuel for the reefer. So take a look at that. And the other thing too is when people seal your doors and they don't do it right, you should demand that they fix it, okay? I don't care if they got to take the seal off, redo the paperwork, and I know that's going to take time. But if for some reason you got a load where the last 2 pallets end up being partially thawed or get warm or whatever, you're going to be held responsible because the door wasn't closed properly, okay? And oftentimes, not often, but it does happen where the top seal, or excuse me, the top cam is not actually locked in and it's outside of the holder. That'll allow the door to flap. Every time you hit a bump, the door flaps a little bit. It also damages the doors. So I'm not trying to sound like a guy that's in charge of anything at the company, but the bottom line is, if you're the #1 refrigerated carrier in the entire world, then you're only as good as the refrigerated trailers you're using. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate y'all. Be safe out there, and we'll be back with you shortly here on Tim Travels. Bye.